London, 1888. The streets were covered in thick fog. Horse-drawn carriages echoed across the cobblestone roads, magnificent mansions stood proudly, and society judged a person's worth not by their character, but by their family name and fortune. In one of the city's grandest estates lived a young maid named Eliza. She was hard-working, kind-hearted, and quiet by nature. After losing her father years earlier, she had taken a position as a servant in the mansion to support her sick mother and keep food on the table. The owner of the estate was Lord Edward Ashford a respected aristocrat from one of England's wealthiest families. Although he lived a life of luxury, he was known for his compassion and treated people with dignity rather than arrogance. One afternoon, while Eliza was dusting the shelves of the mansion's enormous library, she met Lord Edward for the very first time. Their conversation lasted only a few moments, yet something about that brief encounter stayed with both of them. As the weeks passed, their paths crossed again and again. Sometimes they met in the quiet library, sometimes in the beautifully landscaped gardens, and sometimes in the long candlelit hallways of the mansion. They spoke about books, music, dreams, and the world beyond the rigid walls of Victorian society. Slowly, an unexpected bond began to grow between two people who belonged to completely different worlds. But neither of them realized that their growing affection was about to challenge the strict social rules of Victorian England. Their love would soon become a secret that could destroy reputations, divide powerful families, and change their lives forever. The following morning, the mansion was alive with its usual routine. Servants hurried through the corridors, maids polished the marble floors, and the kitchen buzzed with preparations for an important dinner that would welcome several of London's most influential aristocrats. Eliza worked quietly, trying to keep her thoughts on her duties. Yet she couldn't stop thinking about her unexpected conversation with Lord Edward the day before. She reminded herself that she was only a servant, while he belonged to one of the most powerful families in England. Their worlds were never meant to cross. That afternoon, Lord Edward wandered into the estate's rose garden carrying a book. To his surprise, he found Eliza carefully trimming the flowers. For a brief moment, they simply smiled at one another. "I've read every book in this library," Edward said with a gentle smile. "But somehow, yesterday's conversation was more interesting than any of them." Eliza lowered her eyes, trying to hide her nervousness. "My lord," she replied softly, "people like me are expected to listen, not to speak." Edward shook his head. "I've never believed that a person's worth is measured by their title or wealth." His words stayed with Eliza long after he had walked away. Over the next few weeks, their meetings became more frequent. Sometimes Edward would leave a novel on a garden bench, knowing Eliza would find it after finishing her work. Other times, they would exchange only a few quiet words in the library while the rest of the household remained unaware. For the first time in years, Eliza felt that someone truly saw her, not as a servant, but as a person with dreams, fears, and hopes. But not everyone in Ashford Manor was blind to what was happening. Lady Beatrice Ashford, Edward's widowed aunt, was a woman who valued family honor above everything else. One evening, as she looked down from the second-floor balcony, she noticed Edward speaking to Eliza in the garden. The conversation seemed innocent, yet the warmth in Edward's eyes immediately caught her attention. A look of concern crossed her face. "This must end before it becomes a scandal," she whispered to herself. Without wasting another moment, she ordered the head butler to keep a close watch on the young maid. Neither Edward nor Eliza realized that from this day forward, every meeting, every smile, and every secret conversation would be watched by someone determined to tear them apart. Days passed, but the atmosphere inside Ashford Manor had quietly begun to change. Eliza noticed that the other servants had become unusually silent whenever she entered a room. Conversations stopped. Curious glances followed her through the hallways. It was clear that rumors were beginning to spread. Lord Edward noticed it too. One rainy evening, he asked Eliza to meet him in the old greenhouse at the far end of the estate, a place that had long been forgotten by the rest of the household. As rain tapped softly against the glass roof, Edward looked at her with genuine concern. "Have they been treating you differently?" he asked. Eliza hesitated before answering. "They're whispering about me, my lord. They think I've forgotten my place." Edward stepped closer. "You've done nothing wrong." "But you have everything to lose," Eliza replied. "Your family, your name, your future." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Edward reached into his coat pocket and carefully unfolded a small piece of paper. It was an invitation from one of England's most powerful noble families. His aunt, Lady Beatrice, had arranged for him to meet Lady Charlotte Pembroke the daughter of a wealthy duke. Everyone expected the meeting to lead to an engagement. "My family has already chosen my future," Edward said quietly. Eliza felt her heart sink. She forced a smile, though tears threatened to fill her eyes. "Then perhaps this is where our story should end." Edward immediately shook his head. "No. I refuse to let anyone else decide who I should love." At that very moment, neither of them realized they were not alone. Outside the greenhouse, hidden behind the ivy-covered wall, the head butler had heard every single word. Without making a sound, he hurried back toward the mansion. Within minutes, Lady Beatrice received the news she had feared the most. Her suspicions had been confirmed. The relationship between Lord Edward and the young maid was no longer an innocent friendship. It had become a forbidden love affair. Lady Beatrice stood silently beside the fireplace, her face cold and determined. "If that girl believes she can become part of this family," she said, "she has no idea what I'm prepared to do." Far away, in a small cottage on the outskirts of London, another secret was about to come to light. A frail old woman, Eliza's mother, opened a small wooden chest that had remained locked for nearly 20 years. Inside lay a faded letter, an antique silver locket, and a family seal that could change everything they believed about Eliza's past. The truth had been hidden for decades. And once it was revealed, nothing in Ashford Manor would ever be the same again. The next morning, Lady Beatrice wasted no time putting her plan into motion. Eliza was summoned to the drawing room, a place where servants were rarely invited unless they had made a serious mistake. As she entered, Lady Beatrice stood beside the fireplace, dressed in black silk, her expression calm but unforgiving. "You've served this family well," she began. "But I believe you've forgotten the difference between kindness and ambition." Eliza lowered her head. "I don't understand, my lady." "Oh, I think you do." Lady Beatrice walked slowly toward her. "My nephew is the future of the Ashford family. His life has already been decided. He will marry Lady Charlotte Pembroke, and together they will strengthen the reputation of our family." She paused before continuing. "And you are merely a servant." The words struck Eliza like a blade. She wanted to defend herself, but she knew that anything she said would only make matters worse. Lady Beatrice placed a small leather pouch filled with gold coins on the table. "Take this money." Eliza looked at it in disbelief. "Leave London today. Never speak to Edward again, and no one will know this unfortunate misunderstanding ever happened." For several seconds, the room fell completely silent. Finally, Eliza pushed the pouch back across the table. "I may be poor," she said softly, "but my dignity is not for sale." Lady Beatrice's expression hardened. "You've made a terrible mistake." That evening, Lord Edward returned to the mansion after a meeting in Parliament. The moment he learned what had happened, he rushed through the corridors searching for Eliza. He found her standing alone in the garden beneath an old oak tree. "I'm sorry," he said, breathing heavily. "I should have protected you." Eliza smiled sadly. "You can't protect me from your family." Edward looked directly into her eyes. "Then I'll leave this life behind." Eliza stared at him in shock. "You would abandon your title?" "If that's the price of loving you, then yes." Before she could answer, the sound of slow applause echoed through the garden. They turned around. Standing only a few steps away was Lady Charlotte Pembroke. She had heard every word. Her elegant smile hid something far more dangerous than anger. "I've spent weeks preparing to become Lord Edward's wife," she said calmly. "But now, it seems I have competition." She looked at Eliza with cold determination. "I promise you this. You have no idea who you're standing against." As she walked away into the darkness, Edward realized that his greatest obstacle might not be his aunt after all. Lady Charlotte was intelligent, powerful, and unwilling to lose. And she was already planning her next move. The following day, dark clouds hung over London as if the city itself sensed that something extraordinary was about to happen. At a small cottage on the outskirts of the city, Eliza sat beside her mother's bed. Her mother's health had grown weaker with each passing day, and the secret she had guarded for nearly 20 years could no longer remain hidden. With trembling hands, she unlocked the old wooden chest. Inside lay the silver locket, a faded letter sealed with dark red wax, and an elegant signet ring engraved with a crest Eliza had never seen before. "My mother," Eliza whispered. "What do these belong to?" Her mother closed her eyes for a moment before speaking. "They belong to your father." Eliza froze. "I thought father was a carpenter." Her mother slowly shook her head. "No, that was the story I told to keep you safe." Tears filled Eliza's eyes. "Then, who was he?" After a long silence, her mother finally answered. "Your father was Lord William Ashford, the elder brother of Lord Edward's late father." The room fell completely silent. Eliza could barely breathe. If what her mother was saying was true, then everything she believed about her life had been a lie. But why would you hide something like that? Her mother looked toward the rain-covered window. "Because your father's death was never an accident. He discovered a conspiracy within the Ashford family. Before he could reveal the truth, he died under mysterious circumstances." She handed Eliza the faded letter. "Your father wrote this only days before he died. He believed someone inside the family wanted him silenced." Eliza carefully broke the old wax seal. As she unfolded the fragile paper, her hands trembled. The letter read, "Asterisk, if anything happens to me, protect our daughter. One day she must learn who she truly is. Trust no one inside Ashford Manor, especially those who smile the most." Asterisk. A chill ran down Eliza's spine. At that very moment, miles away at Ashford Manor, Lady Beatrice stood inside the family library, staring at a portrait of Lord William Ashford. The head butler entered quietly. "My lady," he said nervously, "our men have confirmed something." Lady Beatrice turned slowly. "What is it?" "The maid. Eliza. She is carrying Lord William's family locket." For the first time in years, the color disappeared from Lady Beatrice's face. "Impossible," she whispered. "If she has that locket, then the past has finally returned." She walked to the fireplace and threw another log onto the flames. No one must ever discover the truth. Outside, thunder echoed across the London sky. A secret buried for 2 decades was beginning to surface. And someone was willing to kill again to make sure it stayed hidden forever. The storm raged throughout the night. By sunrise, Ashford Manor looked peaceful once again, but behind its elegant walls, fear had begun to replace pride. Lady Beatrice called an emergency meeting in the mansion's private study. Only 3 people were invited: the head butler, the family solicitor, and Sir Reginald Blackwood, a trusted family advisor who had served the Ashfords for more than 30 years. She placed the silver family crest on the table. "If Eliza is truly William Ashford's daughter," she said, "everything we've built could collapse." The solicitor adjusted his spectacles. According to Lord William's final will, if a legitimate heir were ever found, she would have a legal claim to part of the Ashford estate. Silence filled the room. Sir Reginald spoke in a low voice. "Then we must make certain that no court ever sees the evidence." Lady Beatrice looked toward the fire. "No, we don't destroy the evidence." The others looked at her in surprise. "We find it first." Meanwhile, Eliza spent the entire afternoon reading her father's letter again and again. Every sentence raised more questions than answers. Why had Lord William trusted no one? Who had wanted him dead? And what was so important that he had risked his life to protect it? As she searched through the wooden chest once more, her fingers touched something hidden beneath the false bottom. She carefully lifted the wooden panel. Underneath was a small leather diary. Its pages had turned yellow with age. On the very first page were the words, "Asterisk asterisk Private Journal of Lord William Ashford." Asterisk asterisk. Eliza's heart raced. She opened the diary. Most of the pages described family meetings, political affairs, and daily life. But one entry immediately caught her attention. It was dated only 3 days before Lord William's death. Tonight I discovered that someone within my own family has been secretly selling government information for personal profit. If these documents fall into the wrong hands, England itself could suffer. I have hidden the evidence where only my daughter will one day find it. Eliza's breathing became heavier. The final sentence was underlined. The key is beneath the angel of mercy. What does that mean? She whispered. Suddenly, a loud knock echoed through the cottage. 3 sharp knocks. Then complete silence. Eliza quickly closed the diary. Her mother looked frightened. No one knows we're here. Another knock. This time, even louder. Eliza slowly walked toward the front door. Who's there? She asked. No answer. She carefully opened the door. There was no one outside. Only a small black envelope lying on the doorstep. Inside was a single card with no signature. It read, some secrets should remain buried. Walk away, or you will share your father's fate. Eliza's hands began to tremble. Someone knew she had discovered the truth. And someone was watching her every move. Far across London, Lord Edward stood by the window of Ashford Manor, unaware of the threat closing in around the woman he loved. But before the night was over, he too would receive a message, one that would force him to choose between his family and the truth. That same evening, a servant quietly delivered a sealed envelope to Lord Edward's study. There was no family crest, no sender's name. Only 3 words were written across the front. For Edward alone. Curious, he broke the seal. Inside was a single sheet of paper. The message was brief. If you truly care for Eliza, stop searching for the truth. The moment you continue, her life will be worth less than your family's reputation. Edward read the letter twice. Then a third time. Whoever had written it knew about Eliza, and they were confident enough to threaten the future Lord of Ashford Manor. Instead of frightening him, the warning strengthened his resolve. He threw the letter into the fireplace. I won't abandon her, he whispered. The following morning, Edward secretly left the estate before sunrise and rode to the small cottage where Eliza lived. When she opened the door, she was shocked to see him. You shouldn't be here, she said urgently. They're watching us. Edward stepped inside and quietly closed the door. So am I. Eliza showed him the anonymous warning card and Lord William's diary. Edward carefully read every page. When he reached the final entry, his expression changed. The angel of mercy. He murmured, I know exactly what Father William meant. Eliza looked at him in surprise. You do? Edward nodded. In the old Ashford family cemetery, there is a marble statue called the Angel of Mercy Star. It has stood there for almost a century. If your father hid something beneath it, then that's where we must go. That night, under the cover of darkness, the two of them slipped into the deserted cemetery. A cold wind swept through the ancient graves. The moonlight illuminated the towering marble angel, its stone wings spread over the forgotten tombs below. For years, no one had dared disturb the monument. Edward knelt beside the statue. There should be a loose stone somewhere. For nearly 20 minutes they searched without success. Just as they were about to give up, Eliza noticed a small carving near the base of the statue. It was the same symbol engraved on her father's signet ring. She pressed it gently. A faint click echoed through the cemetery. A hidden stone slid aside. Beneath it lay a small iron box, untouched by time. Edward carefully lifted it out. The lock had long since rusted away. Inside were several official government documents, a leather-bound ledger, and one final sealed letter addressed to the next true heir of Ashford Manor. Before either of them could open it, the sound of footsteps echoed through the darkness. One pair, then another, then many more. Lanterns suddenly lit up among the graves. Edward immediately recognized one of the voices. "Search every corner," Sir Reginald ordered. "They cannot leave this cemetery with that box." Edward looked at Eliza. "We've been followed." The lanterns moved closer. There was nowhere left to hide. And for the first time, the truth they had risked everything to uncover was only moments away from falling into the wrong hands. Edward grabbed the iron box, and without another word, he and Eliza ran deeper into the cemetery. The sound of boots echoed behind them. "Don't let them escape," Sir Reginald shouted. Lanterns flickered through the darkness as men spread out between the old graves, determined to capture them before they could leave with the evidence. Edward knew the cemetery well. "There," he whispered, pointing toward a narrow stone passage hidden behind an ancient mausoleum. They squeezed through just as two of Sir Reginald's men reached the entrance. The passage led to an abandoned chapel that had been closed for decades. Inside, dust covered the wooden pews, and broken stained glass windows allowed pale moonlight to spill across the floor. Breathing heavily, Edward placed the iron box on the altar. "We don't have much time." With trembling hands, Eliza opened the final sealed letter. It had been written in Lord William Ashford's unmistakable handwriting. She began to read aloud. "Asterisk to whoever finds this letter. Asterisk. Asterisk if these words have reached you, then I am no longer alive. Asterisk. Asterisk the documents inside this box prove that members of the Ashford family, together with Sir Reginald Blackwood, sold confidential government information to foreign agents in exchange for wealth and political influence. Asterisk." Edward looked up in disbelief. "Reginald." The letter continued. Asterisk I gathered enough evidence to expose them before Parliament. They discovered my investigation before I could act. Asterisk. Asterisk if my death is declared an accident, know that it was murder. Asterisk. Eliza's hands began to shake. She struggled to continue reading. Asterisk my greatest regret is leaving my daughter unprotected. If she survives to read this letter, tell her that I loved her every day of my life. She must not seek revenge. She must seek justice. Asterisk. A tear rolled down Eliza's cheek. For the first time, she understood why her mother had hidden the truth for so many years. Suddenly, the heavy wooden doors of the chapel burst open. Sir Reginald stepped inside, followed by 4 armed men. His calm smile sent a chill through the room. "So," he said slowly, "you found William's little insurance policy." Edward stood between Reginald and Eliza. "You murdered my uncle." Sir Reginald gave a quiet laugh. "Your uncle was a good man. He simply trusted the wrong people." He slowly drew a pistol from inside his coat. "You should have walked away while you still had the chance." The chapel fell silent. Rain began to pound against the broken windows. Edward glanced at Eliza and whispered, "No matter what happens, don't let them take the box." Sir Reginald raised the pistol. For a split second, no one moved. Then, a gunshot shattered the silence. The echo rolled through the abandoned chapel. Someone cried out in pain, but as the smoke cleared, it was impossible to tell who had been hit. The sound of the gunshot echoed through the abandoned chapel. For a moment, everything stood still. Then Edward staggered backward, clutching his left shoulder. Blood slowly spread across his coat. "Edward!" Eliza screamed as she rushed to his side. "It's only my shoulder," he said through gritted teeth. "Take the box. Don't let them have it." Sir Reginald stepped forward, his pistol still raised. "Enough of this," he said coldly. "Hand me the documents, and perhaps I'll spare your lives." Eliza looked at the iron box, then at Edward. She remembered the final words of Lord William's letter. Asterisk do not seek revenge. Seek justice. Asterisk. With new determination, she stood up. "You'll never destroy the truth." Before Sir Reginald could react, Eliza hurled a heavy brass candle holder toward one of the chapel windows. The ancient glass shattered with a deafening crash. The noise echoed across the cemetery. Lights began to appear in the distance. The chapel stood only a short walk from the village, and the sound of breaking glass had drawn the attention of nearby residents. Sir Reginald realized what was happening. "Stop her!" he shouted. His men rushed forward. Edward, despite his injury, tackled one of them to the ground, buying Eliza just enough time. She grabbed the iron box and ran through a side door at the back of the chapel. Rain poured heavily as she raced through the narrow streets of London. Behind her, footsteps grew louder. She didn't dare look back. Finally, she reached the entrance of Scotland Yard. Without hesitation, she pushed open the large wooden doors. Inside, several officers looked up in surprise. A young woman, soaked by the rain and carrying an old iron box, stood before them. "I need to speak to the commissioner," Eliza said, struggling to catch her breath. "It's about murder, treason, and the Ashford family." The officers exchanged uncertain glances. Just then, an elderly detective stepped forward. He introduced himself. "My name is Inspector Arthur Collins. I knew Lord William Ashford." The room fell silent. Inspector Collins looked at the box in Eliza's hands and slowly nodded. "So, you finally found what he died to protect." Meanwhile, back at the chapel, Sir Reginald realized Eliza had escaped. His face turned pale. "If those documents reach Scotland Yard," he whispered, "it's all over." For the first time in decades, the powerful men behind the conspiracy were no longer hunting the truth. The truth was hunting them. The following morning, the case that had been hidden for nearly 20 years finally began to unravel. Inside Scotland Yard, Inspector Arthur Collins carefully unlocked the iron box. Every document was placed on a large oak table. There were government contracts, secret financial records, coded letters, and Lord William Ashford's original journal. As Collins examined the evidence, his expression grew increasingly serious. "This is more than a family scandal," he said quietly. "This is treason against the crown." Within hours, senior investigators were called in. By noon, arrest warrants had been signed. At Ashford Manor, Lady Beatrice was preparing for breakfast when the front doors burst open. A line of Scotland Yard officers entered the grand entrance hall. The lead officer stepped forward. "Lady Beatrice Ashford, you are under arrest on suspicion of conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and concealing evidence related to the murder of Lord William Ashford." The silver teacup slipped from Lady Beatrice's hands and shattered across the marble floor. "This is absurd," she protested. "You have no proof." The officer calmly unfolded a warrant. "We have more proof than you can imagine." As the officers searched the mansion, hidden ledgers, coded correspondence, and locked safes were discovered behind a false wall in the family library. Every discovery strengthened the case. Across London, Sir Reginald Blackwood tried to flee the country before sunset. Disguised in a long coat and hat, he boarded a carriage bound for the docks. He believed he still had time. He was wrong. Before the carriage could leave the city, dozens of Scotland Yard officers surrounded it. Inspector Collins stepped forward. "It's over, Reginald." Sir Reginald slowly raised his hands. For the first time in 30 years, the man who had controlled others through fear had nowhere left to run. Several weeks later, one of the most important trials in Victorian England began. The courtroom was packed with journalists, politicians, noble families, and ordinary citizens. Everyone wanted to hear the truth. When Eliza entered the courtroom, whispers spread through the gallery. Few people could believe that the quiet young maid had uncovered a conspiracy that had remained hidden for decades. Edward, his shoulder now healing, smiled proudly as she took her place before the judge. Inspector Collins presented every document recovered from the iron box. One by one, the witnesses testified. The evidence was overwhelming. Finally, the judge looked toward Sir Reginald. "Do you have anything to say before this court delivers its judgment?" For the first time since his arrest, Sir Reginald lowered his head. His voice was barely audible. Lord William was never supposed to die. The courtroom fell silent. "I only wanted the documents." But when he refused, everything spiraled beyond my control. His confession removed the last remaining doubt. Justice, delayed for 20 years, had finally caught up with those responsible. Outside the courthouse, Thousands of people waited for the verdict. London held its breath. Within moments, history would be made. The courthouse fell completely silent as the judge prepared to deliver the final verdict. Everyone in the courtroom rose to their feet. Journalists tightened their grip on their notebooks, while spectators leaned forward, waiting to hear the decision that would bring an end to a mystery that had haunted Victorian London for 2 decades. The judge looked directly at Sir Reginald Blackwood. After carefully reviewing the evidence and hearing the testimony presented before this court, you are found guilty of conspiracy, treason, the murder of Lord William Ashford, and the deliberate concealment of evidence. A murmur spread through the courtroom. You are hereby sentenced to life imprisonment. Sir Reginald slowly closed his eyes. His years of power and influence had ended in a single moment. The judge then turned toward Lady Beatrice Ashford. You are found guilty of obstructing justice and knowingly concealing evidence related to these crimes. She bowed her head without a word. The courtroom doors opened, and both prisoners were led away under heavy guard. For the first time in 20 years, the Ashford family's darkest secret was no longer hidden. Several weeks later, Lord William Ashford's name was officially cleared. The government publicly acknowledged that he had died while trying to protect confidential state information. His honor was restored. A memorial ceremony was held in London, attended by government officials, members of parliament, and ordinary citizens. Among the guests stood Eliza. She gently placed the silver locket on her father's memorial and whispered, "You kept your promise, father. Now I've kept mine." A single tear rolled down her cheek, not from sadness, but from peace. Edward walked toward her. His shoulder had fully healed, but the events of the past months had changed him forever. "I've been thinking," he said with a smile. "I don't need a title to know who I am." He reached into his pocket and produced a small velvet box. Inside was a simple gold ring, not decorated with diamonds, not marked by a family crest. Just a plain ring, symbolizing love rather than status. Edward looked into Eliza's eyes. "Eliza, will you spend the rest of your life with me?" For a brief moment, she remembered every obstacle they had overcome, every secret, every sacrifice, every painful goodbye they had almost been forced to say. Then she smiled through her tears. "Yes." Edward slipped the ring onto her finger as the church bells echoed across London. 1 year later, Edward and Eliza no longer lived in Ashford Manor. Instead, they had chosen a quiet countryside estate where wealth meant little and happiness meant everything. Together, they opened a school for children from poor families, believing that education, not birth or social class, should determine a person's future. The grand Ashford estate was eventually transformed into a public museum, preserving the family's history, both its triumphs and its mistakes. Visitors came from across Britain to learn how courage, truth, and justice had defeated greed and corruption. As the sun set over the English countryside, Eliza stood in a garden filled with blooming roses. She looked toward the horizon and smiled. Her story had begun as that of a forgotten servant. It ended as the story of a woman who changed the fate of one of England's most powerful families, not through wealth or revenge, but through honesty, courage, and an unwavering belief that the truth always finds its way into the light. And so, the legend of Eliza Ashford lived on, reminding future generations that love can cross every boundary, and justice, no matter how delayed, will always find its moment. **The end.